All right, vendor finance. What are the hesitations a seller might have around providing vendor finance? So firstly, we just need to take a step back and decide and talk about what is vendor finance. It's something that a lot of people don't realize is an option. It's not common in my experience. However, in certain situations, it can really help to create a deal where otherwise one may not have been possible. So vendor finance, so if we take the jargon away from it, vendor, the seller. So the person selling the business provides finance. So effectively what it is instead of the bank lending you money, the vendor is lending you money to purchase their business. So let's use a basic example. You are buying a business for 500,000. You need to pay 300,000 and then the vendor will give you finance for 200,000. So it basically means purchase price is 500, you pay 300K in cash. However you get that cash, you borrow it from the bank, whatever. And then 200,000 is left as a loan between yourself and the seller, and then there'll be terms to that like any other loan. Now, the pros and the cons. And this particular question was asking about why a seller might be hesitant. The pros for a seller is that it means a deal might happen where otherwise it might not have. So this person interested in buying the business may only have 300K. That may be all the cash that they can access. The bank won't give them any more, they haven't saved any more, whatever. And by providing that finance means the deal can still go through, whereas otherwise it might fall over and not happen. So that's usually one of the big pros. Another pro from the seller's perspective can be, it's just like any other loan. I don't know what they were going to do with that money, but if they're just going to go and invest it or stick it in the bank on a term deposit or shares, and they get usual market rates, versus giving a loan will usually give them a much higher return than they otherwise may get doing something else with that money. So again, like any deal, it comes back to the buyer and the seller, what's important to them and what do they care about. The cons and the reasons why a seller may be hesitant to give vendor finance, which is what this question was, is that they might want the cash. They might not want, they might want the full 500K and not just 300 now. So that's very common. The second one is that when they give the finance, just like anyone else lending you money, they'll want security. So if you don't repay them the 200,000, what happens? And typically what would happen is they would take security over the shares in the company. So could you not pay them that 200,000, they may take back over some shares in that company. So a key reason I find where sellers are hesitant is because they're selling their business because they're ready to move on. They don't want to continue to have risk in that business. They would prefer just to take the cash, keep it clean, they move on, and whoever's buying the business borrows from whoever else they can, and the buyer and seller are no longer linked. If a seller gives finance, they still care about how that business performs, because that business performing is likely to generate the cash for the buyer to be able to pay the seller back, repay their vendor loan. So they'll still care and have that risk factor involved in how the business performs. This leads to, when I've seen it be the most successful and work really well, is where the seller knows the buyer. So the most common place I do see this happening is family, parents retiring, selling their business to their kids who are coming up running it. Or doesn't have to be family, but selling to someone in the business who's been in the business for a while, running it. They know each other, they know how each other works, and the seller can get quite confident that this person they're selling to will continue to run the business in a really profitable way. So the risk over that loan and the business being able to generate the profits to continue to repay that loan to the seller is very low. Where it doesn't work is where the seller just really doesn't know the buyer, and they're not prepared to take that risk on a new buyer being able to continue to run the business. Like with anything, buying and selling a business, there are just so many nuances, and there's so many different ways you can structure the deals and structure the arrangements and structure the security and the payments and the terms and all that kind of stuff. So often there is workarounds if it is something both parties are interested, but as a general overarching rule, that's the way I've seen it work in practice.